We do a lot of pink and magenta on the channel, but today we're finally going to do the non-metallic metal purple that we do so much here. And what's the difference between pink and purple? The grip. Welcome back, heretics. We're finally going through the non-metallic metal purple that we do so often around here, but we've never actually addressed in a paint guide, so we'll do that now. We started off with a black primer, as we typically always do, and then I actually went back over and used a black paint. Now, the reason for this is so if you need to tidy anything up, you can go back to the black paint and you know it's going to match. Sometimes primers don't quite match, even if they say they're the same color on the bottle. So jumping straight into purple, all we're really doing here is we're going to pick out where the light's going to hit. We're going to use that black as our deepest, darkest shadow. I know we don't usually go straight into black, but this is a semi-synthwave thing, and you'll see how we turn in synthwave as we go along in the video. So basically what we're doing here is I'm picking out where all the light's going to hit and where I want that refraction. I'm not really worried too much about all the extra light sources. You can have, you know, your main light source, you can have your tertiary light source, bounce lights, all of those kind of things. But we're going to really simplify this one. And honestly, this is the longest step. This is what takes the longest. It's picking out all the lights and all that kind of thing with this purple. This purple is going to be the base that we start really building up on. As far as I'm concerned, there's only really two things to think about when painting metallics or non-metallics of what we're doing here. The first one is contrast. So that's why we've got the black and we're going straight up into a purple. That's already a pretty big jump, even though this purple is relatively dark compared to where we're going. The other thing is you have to think about the shapes. Now, Space Marines are usually just a bunch of cylinders. There is a few flat things, but it's usually cylinders and curves. Now, things like the knee pad, where it really is just a circle, you know, you're going to have to start to think about how light is going to react to that. If you want to have a look at home of something you've got, turn a bowl upside down and just see what the light does to it, especially if it's a metal bowl. That actually works really well. For everything else like the arms and the legs, we're talking cylinders, so you can paint lines in there, and that's what I'm going to be doing here. A lot of pro painters don't really like the whole line work thing to represent a non-metallic, but I feel that's probably the easiest way. And if this is your first go at a non-metallic metal, this is probably going to be the easiest way for you to jump in as well. So what I'm doing here is I've actually mixed magenta into this purple. Now you can use white or skin tones to kind of lighten it, but it's also going to desaturate your purple. I still want a very vivid saturated color in here, so I'm going into magenta. So with that little bit of magenta, it's not much of a mix, there's not much of a contrast here, but what it is going to do is start building up a gradient, which is just a slow fade, and basically it's going to start to make everything pop. This is where the life and the shape is going to start to come out. Now we're just going back over where we had all the purple. That's what I was saying before. The purple is the longest and the hardest step because you're starting from scratch. Once you've got all of those kind of values in, you're just tracing over it essentially. And every time you paint over with a new color, you paint less and less of that section. The other thing I want to let you know is just because I've picked a bunch of purples and magenta for this, it doesn't mean that you can't use other colors. It doesn't even really matter what paints you use for it. If it's a color you like, this is a transferable skill. So while I'm doing purple and magenta, you can 100% go out and do blues, yellows, reds. This same thing will work. All these same ideas will apply. And yes, it's a little bit blurry down the bottom. My hair was getting in the way of the camera. Each step from here is essentially going to be the same idea. We're going to mix a little bit more magenta into our purple mix, and we're going to start painting inside of all those lines and all those spots that we selected with the purple. Each time it's just covering a little bit less, a little bit less, a little bit less, and that's what builds up a very easy gradient. Now you can thin your paints here as much or as little as you want. It all depends on how smooth you want to get it at the end. Now I like to use something a little bit above dirty paint water where it's still a lot of pigment in it, but it's very smooth and very thin. This is what I find gives me the best gradients for how I paint, but the best way is for you to figure that out for yourself. After you've worked your way up in that mix to pure magenta, now we can actually start edge highlighting other places. We're at our mid-tone. Now, We don't really want it to read as magenta, but we're going to be going higher than this. I feel this is probably the easiest way to kind of cut it into segments. So the purple becomes our base, we start mixing magenta. Once we get to the magenta by itself, we can start edge highlighting, we can almost call that a mid-tone, and then we go further up into our highlights. So the color here that I'm using is the same magenta, but I've mixed a little bit of a skin tone into it. Now, I like to use skin tones because it doesn't desaturate like a white does. It keeps it warm, it keeps it vibrant, but we still get a lighter color. And that is definitely a little trick for the future when you're working with magentas. As you start working with your highlights, it's really good to remember here that you shouldn't be highlighting everything up to the same level. You don't want to go as extreme on everything because the light does not hit every surface equally. There's shadows, there's bounces, there's all these kind of things, but the direct sunlight on things like hard edges, or where the light's most intense, or where the model is closest to our source of light, that's where you want to go and build up a little bit more. Corners, especially, are probably the things that you want to do last with your lightest and brightest highlight. You might have heard before from miniature artists talking about focus and directing focus. Now, mostly in that kind of conversation, you'll be talking about drawing the focus towards the head or the face, because human nature, that's where we look. You know, that's kind of where a person keeps their brain, is just behind their face. When people have brains, that's not a totality. That is definitely not a given. But this is actually one of the tricks that they do use to draw focus. Now, the other thing that I've done here is if you check out that neck pocket and where we've just done highlighting and where I'm highlighting right now, I've created a line of the brightest focus. That's where I want the light to be brightest. So I'm creating this visual divide that's going straight down the body through one half of the chest, offset, down through the knee, down through the leg, and that's really going to give us a big line of focus, because at the end of that line on the top is going to be the head when we do it, and we're actually going to paint the head in this as well, and the metallics for the iconography, which we don't do a lot of, but I thought, hey, if we're going to cover the subject, we may as well do the whole thing. As we're getting brighter and adding a little bit more of that flesh tone into the magenta, that's where we really want to start picking out some of these highest highlights. Now, there is the tiniest little bit of magenta in here, and I'm using these as our spectral highlights. Now, again, I'm going to go straight down that line that I've created, because that's where I want basically a big old glare screen to kind of fold down on the model. Now, I know what you're thinking, we've only done half. What about the other side that's basically just black? Well, here's where the synthwave ideas come in. Now, I'm going to do all the shadows, so all the opposite sides of what we just painted. I'm going to use those exact same techniques, but I'm going to go a blue. Now, I'm not going to build it up as high as I did with the purple and the magentas, but we are going to build it up to a point where it looks like there is light. So this is something that's going to give us an almost color shift kind of feel to it. If you wanted to go around and do this step with the same color that you've used on the rest of the armor, 100% go for it. That is what is actually going to give you a full non-metallic metal feel for the entire miniature. I just like to be a little bit different and try weird things. Sem Lens has been a fantastic influence on me, where every piece is an experiment, and I've taken that to heart, where it doesn't matter if I'm doing it for a video or painting for me personally, hell, even commissions when I do them. Trying something new or a new approach at something that you've already done and you feel really comfortable with is a great way to learn and to grow, especially in miniature painting. Even if that experiment becomes a failure as far as what you had on your head, it could actually give you a new way to look at something. This paint job right here is actually the result of that. Now, I was trying to do something completely different, of trying a different shadow color being offset to the main color of the armor, and it didn't work. The first time I tried this, it did not work. But this I really like, and it gave me the tools to start building upon to be able to get to something that I do like. It comes back to the old cliche of if you don't fail, you don't learn, and I think that is especially relatable, especially for somebody like me. Now that we're done with the armor, we're going to go into the iconography and we're going to use the exact same idea. Yes, this is the same idea and the third color. This is a very, very transferable skill. Now, I started off here with a deep sea blue, which comes out pretty green. And to build up the highlights on here, I just mixed in blue-green into that mix, and we kind of just take a little step up at a time. Now, I've gone with the complete darkest recess as that deep sea blue, and now I'm coming over with what I'm essentially going to have as my mid-tone, and every time we step up, I'm going to pick out less and less. Now, because we did create that line going down the offset and going down the leg with the purple, I want to continue that theme with the green. That's what's going to sell this whole thing, when everything kind of looks like it's in the exact same environment or in the same atmosphere. So we still want that contrast, so I've got those little bit of dark parts and dark patches in there. But what I'm going to be focusing on is building up the highlights and pushing them in that very direction. So you can see closer to the skull gets darker, and the furthest wingtip into the armpit is also darker, with that middle section being where our brightest highlights are going. This is ultimately going to sell the entire idea. If you can generally sell one piece of the miniature, but you've used the same techniques on the rest, generally your eye will do the rest of the work for you. If you're tricking your eye into saying, hey, that looks metallic, and then everything else is done in the same way and everything's pointing in the same direction, your eye will say, this is metallic. Now we've gone this far, so we may as well do the head as well. Now, I wanted to do a white head, but cold white, so we've got to do blue. But we're going to have to build it up because we primed in black, and you don't want to go straight to white from black. So I started with the medium blue, and I'm just mixing a very, very light blue in as we go. And we're very quickly going to get to that light blue and then have to start to mix in white. Now that's what I'm doing here. We're going to leave all that really light blue in the recesses. So the blue that you're seeing on screen right now, that is the deepest, darkest recess that we want for this color, because we want a big, bright, white helmet. We want it so white that it pronounces the H in ghetto. We want it so white that it thinks salt and pepper is seasoning. And guess what? We're going to be using the exact same idea that we've been using for the entire video. Every time we take a lighter and brighter step with our paint, we are going to paint less and less of the model that we're focusing on. So we're going to be moving towards the highlights. The highlights are obviously our brightest parts, which that's basically our sticky outy bits, as Vincent Venturella likes to say. So all the recesses are going to be essentially blue. So this is going to be a super light blue. That's going to be our deepest, darkest color. And you can see here how we've built up to that white. All right, let's quickly finish off with some eyes. We've gone magenta, a little bit of skin tone to create a mid-tone of that magenta, and then a dot of white at the end. Now for the big reveal. Now obviously I'm not a professional, and this is not the smoothest paint job that I've ever done, or probably that you've ever seen, but it is a great way to start thinking about how to approach non-metallic metals. I want to thank a massive shout out to all our Patreons that keep the channel going. We love you all, and we'll see you next Tuesday.